What is up, guys? Randomonium here, and today we're going to be talking about Juggernauts. This video is a follow-up of my how to find your ideal playstyle, class, and subclass video, so if you haven't watched that one yet, I highly recommend it. In this video, we're going to be covering Nasus, Trundle, and Yorick. All of their champions will be covered in other videos. Also, I want to give a very special thank you to all of the Juggernaut mains who helped me with this video. As you can see on the screen, I had a lot of help. All of the in-game footage you see in this video was provided to me by other YouTubers and streamers, so please check them out. I've left a link to all of their channels and streams in the video description below. Juggernauts are some of the most feared champions in League. They have very high base stats, they do massive amounts of damage, and they're extremely tanky. They excel in 1v1 fights and can even 1v2, 1v3, or 1v5 if played correctly. Most Juggernauts have a ton of sustain built into their kits, which allows them to survive in what seems like impossible situations. However, Juggernauts have much less mobility and crowd control than most other classes and virtually no utility. There are some Juggernauts with potent movement speed boosts and very strong forms of crowd control, but in general, Juggernauts are extremely vulnerable to kiting. They struggle against team comps with long ranges and crowd control because they can never close the distance against them. There are two types of Juggernauts, raid bosses and freight trains. Raid bosses are very immobile Juggernauts who can kill pretty much anything that comes within reach of them. They are extremely tanky and can deal absurd amounts of damage, allowing them to take on multiple enemies with ease. However, they are extremely vulnerable to ranged champions that can kite them. Freight trains are more mobile Juggernauts who have movement speed boosts which allow them to rapidly close distance on their enemies, and they often have ways to stick to their enemies while barraging them with attacks, spammable abilities, or damage over time abilities. To compensate for this increased mobility, freight trains are either less tanky than raid bosses or do less damage than raid bosses on average. Special thanks to Dragonshay for a great job defining Juggernauts. I've linked his post in the video description below. Raid bosses are shown on top and freight trains are shown on the bottom. Within each type of Juggernaut, there are those who are more ability-based and those who are more attack-based. Ability-based champions are shown on the left and attack-based champions are shown on the right. Today we'll be focusing on the champions in the upper right corner, the raid bosses who rely on attacks. These Juggernauts are the kings of tower taking. These raid bosses all have spammable auto-attack augmentations on their Q, which is their primary source of damage and sustain, and also acts as an auto-attack reset. Each of these raid bosses synergize very well with Sheen items, and almost always take the Demolish rune in the Resolve tree. They also all have ultimates which make them even more fearsome in combat, and allow them to turn the tide of a battle even when numbers aren't in their favor. These Juggernauts are Nasus, Yorick, and Trundle. Nasus, Yorick, and Trundle are all played in top lane. Additionally, Yorick and Trundle are occasionally played in the jungle, and Trundle is also sometimes played as a support.
Life is part of a cycle. Yours is over.
Nasus, the curator of the sands. Nasus is what people typically think of when they think of a Juggernaut, and may even be the archetype that Riot used to design some of the most recent Juggernauts. At the end of the day, Nasus is all about stacks. He wants stacks with his stacks, and then he wants more stacks on top of that. Nasus loves stacks so much that he should be the official spokesdog for IHOP. And how good you are with Nasus is often based on how quickly you can stack. When people talk about Nasus' stacks, they're talking about his Q, Siphoning Strike. This ability is an auto-attack reset which augments Nasus' next attack to deal bonus physical damage. Additionally, if Nasus kills a unit with his Siphoning Strike, he permanently increases his Siphoning Strike's damage by 3. This is what people mean when they talk about stacks, how much his Siphoning Strike damage has been increased by killing minions or enemy champions. What this means is that, in theory, Nasus is an infinite scaling champion. There is no limit on how much he can stack or how much damage his Q can do. Late game, this can make Nasus near impossible to duel in a 1v1 situation, and makes him completely able to 1v2 or 1v3 if fed. Put bluntly, Nasus is basically a ticking time bomb. If you don't shut him down and end the game, he will eventually reach critical mass and just roll over your team and destroy your towers while barely taking any damage. However, what Nasus really gives up for this scaling power is his early game. Because Nasus maxes Q first, and he primarily uses his Q to deal killing blows to minions in order to get stacks, this means that he has very little trading power in lane. If you're playing against a Nasus, you need to deny him as much farm as possible and abuse his weak early game. When possible, freeze the minion wave on your side of the map and punish Nasus anytime he moves forward to get a stack. It's not terribly important if you kill Nasus or take his tower, just prevent him from farming as much as possible in order to delay his scaling. If you're playing as Nasus, then obviously you want to do the opposite. Avoid trading with your opponents and focus as much as possible on stacking your Q. Learning minion wave control is absolutely essential with Nasus. Another extremely important skill to learn with Nasus is when you have to give up CS. There's going to be times when you really want to get a particularly low health minion, but if you step forward, the enemy will engage on you and you will lose the trade badly. Do not go for minions like these. They are a trap. It's just 1 CS. It's going to be okay. It's better to miss 1 CS than lose half your health in a bad trade and be forced out of lane, which will cause you to lose even more minions and fall behind in levels. However, you should be expected to be punished early as Nasus. Everyone knows that Nasus just wants to farm in the early game, and everyone knows that if you don't punish Nasus, he will absolutely wreck you once the mid game hits. Nasus is kind of like a fat nerdy kid who got picked on when he was a kid, but who gets absolutely jacked once he's an adult. Nasus's passive, Soul Eater, is what allows Nasus to survive through his weak laning phase. Nasus's passive gives him an additional 10 to 20% lifesteal, which allows him to sustain through his laning phase and weather the storm until he gets his stacks up. Nasus's E, Spirit Fire, is an extremely useful spell in difficult matchups for Nasus. This ability deals AoE damage both in an initial burst and then damage over time for 5 seconds. Additionally, those within the AoE have their armor reduced up to 35%. Nasus relies heavily on his E to get CS when he can't safely Q a minion. Nasus also relies heavily on his E to break freezes to allow the lane to reset into a more favorable position so he can continue farming. Depending on how good someone is playing Nasus will determine when they start becoming a threat. I've seen it happen as early as level 6, but most Nasuses start to turn the tide of their lanes around level 8, and usually by around a level 11 you will find it extremely difficult to go toe-to-toe with Nasus. Nasus's stacking is an inevitability. All you can do is slow it down as much as possible. One of the things that makes Nasus so difficult to duel is his W, Wither. This ability slows a target and reduces their attack speed by 5 seconds. Furthermore, both effects increase over Wither's duration up to a maximum of a 95% movement speed slow and a 47.5% attack speed slow at the end of the duration. This makes it extremely difficult to run from Nasus and makes it very hard to outdamage him once he has his Pimp Cane stacked, especially if you're playing an auto attack reliant champion. However, what makes Nasus truly terrifying is his ultimate. This ability grants Nasus up to 600 bonus health, an additional 50 range on his attacks, bonus armor and magic resist, which increases every second that his ultimate is active, and an aura that causes him to deal % maximum health damage to anyone near him every second. And that's not the most terrifying part. The most terrifying part about his ultimate is that it reduces the cooldown on his Siphoning Strike by 50%. Nasus' Siphoning Strike is already on a 4-second cooldown at max rank. This means that Nasus' ultimate reduces that to a 2-second cooldown. And that's without Nasus buying any additional cooldown reduction items. Think about that for a second. An infinite scaling ability on a sub 2-second cooldown. If that doesn't terrify you, then I don't know what will. Despite his infinite scaling, where Nasus really shines is in the mid game. In the late game, Nasus tends to struggle with being crowd controlled and focused down by high DPS carries like marksmen and battle mages. Nasus is extremely immobile, and ultimately it doesn't matter how much damage his Q can deal if he doesn't close range fast enough to use it. In the mid game, Nasus has enough stacks to easily 1v1 or 1v2 most champions in the game, and the map is still spread out enough that he can skirmish and take towers. Nasus is extremely effective in a side lane split pushing, but frequently struggles with team fighting. Nasus can take towers extremely quickly since he can use his Q on towers. Nasus also frequently picks up the Demolish rune so he can take towers even quicker. For keystones, Kleptomancy is the most common on Nasus presently, but that may just be because Kleptomancy is a bit overtuned. Grasp of the Undying and Phase Rush are also decent keystones on Nasus. For the remainder of your runes, you really want to focus on defense and sustain, especially if you're in a bad matchup. Because Nasus's Q has a low cooldown and augments his auto attacks, Sheen items are extremely common on him. Triforce is a good buy if you're ahead, but if you're struggling, Iceborne Gauntlet can be a better purchase. Nasus is not an early game champion. Nasus is not for people who want to stomp their lane. Nasus is for people who are patient and who like trading early power for immense strength in the mid and the late game. Nasus isn't for the big spenders, he's for the long-term investors. Despite his appearance, Nasus is an extremely cerebral champion, and you really need to use your head in order to play him effectively. Everyone knows his strengths and weaknesses, so it's up to you to outsmart your opponents and manage minion waves in ways that give you the advantage and allow you to reach your power spikes sooner.
If you want me to hit you less, die sooner!
Trundle, the Troll King. Trundle is one of the most versatile Juggernauts in League. He has both raid boss and freight train elements to his kit, and he can be played in top lane, jungle, or as a support. There's also a ton of versatility in Trundle's rune setup and builds, so I highly recommend you check out his subreddit or statistical sites like op.gg or lolalytics.com to get the latest strategies with him. Put bluntly, Trundle is a Juggernaut with tons of stat steroids and sustain who can steal stats from enemy champions. This massive amount of stat boost Trundle gets makes him extremely hard to kill, and his sustain makes him very hard to push out of lane. On top of this, his abilities allow him to take towers extremely quickly. Basically, Trundle's game plan is to beat you down, outlast you in lane, take your tower if you leave, and kill you if you don't. While Trundle is known as a stat-stealing Juggernaut, a lot of what gives Trundle his versatility is his E, Pillar of Ice. While this ability is typically maxed last, it is an extremely important ability in Trundle's kit, and one that is frequently underestimated. Trundle's E causes a pillar of ice to appear at a target location, creating impassable terrain. Furthermore, anyone who is near the pillar is slowed for a significant amount. This pillar has a ton of uses, both to set up kills or foil incoming ganks. Additionally, the pillar displaces people directly on top of the pillar, so it can be used to knock enemies back into your team or away from you if you're trying to escape. Trundle's bread and butter ability is his Q, Chomp. Trundle's Q is an auto attack reset that causes his next physical attack to deal bonus damage and slow the target for 0.1 seconds. Furthermore, when Trundle chomps someone, he gains bonus AD and his target has their attack damage reduced as well. This ability is on a 4-second cooldown, making it synergize extremely well with Sheen items. It can also be used on towers, which is one of the reasons why Trundle is able to take towers so quickly. Another reason why Trundle is such a great tower destroyer is his W, Frozen Domain. This ability coats an area in ice for 8 seconds, granting him bonus movement speed, bonus attack speed, and increasing his health restoration from all sources by 25%. This allows him to attack extremely quickly even without additional attack speed items. Trundle's W also allows him to quickly close distance on unsuspecting enemies and trap them with his E, forcing them to fight Trundle on his terms on his empowered ground. What makes Trundle extremely difficult to fight though is his ultimate Subjugate. This ultimate drains the life out of a target enemy champion, stealing 40% of their armor and magic resist and giving it to Trundle. In addition, this target deals up to 17.5% of the target's maximum health instantaneously, and also deals an additional 17.5% of the target's maximum health over 4 seconds. Meanwhile, Trundle heals for all the damage his ultimate deals, and this healing can be increased by his W and by items like Spirit Visage. This makes Trundle especially good at destroying tank champions or champions who build a lot of resistances. He steals all of their defensive stats, he steals a ton of their health, and he even steals some of their attack damage with his Q, all while simultaneously buffing his attack speed and his movement speed on his frozen ground and preventing them from running away with his pillar. This is why many people consider Trundle the tank killer Juggernaut. In many ways, Trundle can also be considered the Juggernaut killer Juggernaut, since Juggernauts also build extremely tanky, and Trundle can steal their stats just as easily. So how do you deal with a rampaging troll who can steal all of your stats and regens health like crazy? Well, the first step is to cut down his healing with a Grievous Wounds item like Morellonomicon, Bramble Vest, or Executioner's Calling. Bramble Vest is especially good against Trundle since the majority of his damage comes from auto attacks, and when you complete Bramble Vest into Thornmail, you also reduce Trundle's attack speed, which cuts down on Trundle's damage even more. Likewise, Ninja Tabby are extremely good with dealing with Trundle since they reduce the damage of his auto attacks. Another important thing to remember with Trundle is that his ultimate only lasts for 4 seconds. Yes, when he activates his ultimate, he becomes extremely strong and near impossible to damage due to his increased tankiness and healing. So don't try to damage him. When he activates his ultimate, disengage to the best of your ability and save your damage spells for when his ultimate wears off. Save your crowd control for when Trundle tries to all-in you and then just walk away. If you waste all of your abilities during Trundle's ultimate, 1, they're going to do a lot less damage due to his increased resistances, and 2, he's just going to heal the damage you deal to him with the lifesteal portion of his ultimate. Perhaps most importantly though is that Trundle has very poor scaling on his own. Because of his ability to steal so many stats, Riot intentionally made Trundle with weaker scaling than other champions because they knew he could steal a significant portion of the scaling from other champions. However, this means that if the enemy team doesn't have any tanks, then Trundle won't have any great targets to steal his scaling resistances from, and he will just be weaker overall. If you're playing Trundle, you need to take all these things into account before playing him. If the enemy team doesn't have any tanks on their team, then Trundle is a bit of a suboptimal pick, and there may be other champions better suited to counter their team comp. However, if the enemy team has multiple tanks, then Trundle is an amazing pick if you ult the right target at the right time. Your ult only lasts 4 seconds, so you need to wait to use it until your enemy has committed to the fight, or you won't be able to gain the maximum benefit from the healing and the stolen resistances. Also, keep in mind how important your pillar is. A properly placed pillar can guarantee a kill or a teamfight victory, while a bad pillar can completely screw your team or allow a low health enemy to escape. The pillar is impassable terrain to everyone, including Trundle, and he can't end the effect early, so it can wind up screwing you just as much as it can screw the enemy team. What people love about Trundle are his thematics and his BM potential. He is a troll after all. Trundle's insane regeneration makes him extremely annoying to lane against, and he can often drain an enemy champion's mana pool before he drops below half health. Trundle's dance and voice lines are also pretty tilting, especially when he takes your full combo and then just heals back up to full health like it's nothing. Thematically, people love the idea of a champion who can steal another champion's stats. Trundle is the only champion in the game who can do that, and it's just an awesome concept. You take your enemy's strength and use it to slaughter them. Now that's some trolling I can get behind.
What I do is just every horrid piece of it.
Yorick, Shepherd of Souls. Thematically and lore-wise, Yorick is one of my favorite champions in the game. Yorick was born on the Blessed Isles with the ability to see ghosts. Initially, Yorick believed this ability to be a curse, and he believed the spirits were there to haunt and torment him. However, over time, he realized that the spirits were just lost, and they were trying to find their way to the beyond. And so Yorick became a shepherd for these lost souls, a friend to guide them on the next step in their journey. His task was bittersweet because every time he was successful, he would lose a friend forever, but ultimately he kept doing it because it was the right thing to do. Eventually, word of Yorick's abilities spread, and a group of monks convinced him to join their order. The monks' purpose was to help the dead and the living. At all times they carried a spade for the dead, ensuring that all corpses would have a proper burial, and a vial of holy water for the living, used to heal and relieve pain. The monks came to shun Yorick as well because he possessed abilities that some considered unnatural and the rest wished they had. And yet Yorick continued to fulfill his duties faithfully because it was the right thing to do. When the cataclysm that turned the Blessed Isles into the Shadow Isles occurred, Yorick and his monk brethren, along with the rest of the Blessed Isles, were consumed by the black mist. The monks around him began ripping the holy vials from their necks as if they were on fire, and as soon as they did, they were consumed by the mist. Mustering his resolve, Yorick ignored the pain, and he ignored the voices beckoning him to remove the vial, the only thing keeping him from being consumed by the mist as well. Through time, Yorick found that his childhood abilities gave him power to control the mist and the dead. With this knowledge, Yorick came to the realization that he alone had the power to end the curse by using the curse to slay the ruined king. He knew that his actions were monstrous, that he was wielding evil and most likely damning his soul, but he does it all the same, because it's the right thing to do. In my mind, this makes Yorick the perfect hero. He doesn't have a beaming smile or a melodic voice, but he is a hero all the same. A hero in my mind is someone who does what is right, no matter what the consequences are. They do what is right even if the rest of the world shuns them. They do what is right even if it means horrible pain, suffering, or death for themselves. That's who Yorick is at his core, a man who does the right thing regardless of the cost. In-game, Yorick is one of the most relentless split pushers in the game. Yorick's passive, Shepherd of Souls, allows Yorick to command up to 4 Mistwalkers. The way that Yorick summons the Mistwalkers is with Graves. Graves naturally spawn after so many minions or monsters die near Yorick. Additionally, Yorick's Q, Last Rites, also automatically spawns a grave if it kills a target. When Yorick has at least 3 graves nearby, and Last Rites is on cooldown, he can use his Q a second time to awaken every grave into a Mistwalker under his control. But that's not all that Yorick's Q is used for. Yorick's Q is an auto attack reset which causes Yorick's next basic attack to have increased range, deal bonus physical damage, and heal Yorick. Additionally, if Yorick is below 50% health, then this healing is doubled. Because his Q is an auto attack reset, Yorick can auto attack Q for a decent amount of damage. Additionally, since his Q is on such a low cooldown, this makes Yorick synergize very well with Sheen items. Choosing when to use your Q to attack a champion or create another grave is a very important skill to learn on Yorick. Because it's Yorick's primary damage spell and it's on a low cooldown, his Q is typically maxed first on Yorick. When Yorick uses his Q to spawn his Mistwalkers, he doesn't have direct control over what the Mistwalkers do. In general, the Mistwalkers attack the enemy closest to them and will continue running it down a lane even if Yorick roams or recalls. However, Yorick can command his ghouls to attack a specific target with his E, Morning Mist. This ability is a skill shot that if it hits an enemy champion, it slows them for 30%, grants Yorick and his ghouls a 20% movement speed when they're moving towards the target, and causes his ghouls to leap onto the target when they're close to them. Yorick's E also deals 15% of the target's current health as magic damage on top of some decent base damage, giving Yorick some magic damage to complement his mostly physical damage kit. It is also extremely important to note that Yorick's ghouls are considered to be a source of Yorick's physical damage. This means that the ghouls can trigger effects from corrupting a potion, they can stack Black Cleaver, and they can even heal Yorick if he has a death stance. However, these items are considered situational on Yorick. Additionally, Yorick's ghouls do not trigger on-hit effects or lifesteal. Typically, Trinity Force is a must-buy on Yorick. Staird's Gauge is also extremely common. Besides that, Yorick normally builds tanky unless he's hard carrying. Right now, Grasp of the Undying is by far the most popular keystone for Yorick, but a few people also like Kleptomancy. Demolish is an essential rune on Yorick since it allows him to take towers even faster. If Yorick is able to land an E on his enemy, he typically follows it up with his W, Dark Procession. This ability, after a 1-second delay, summons a circular wall of spirits that enemies can't pass through, but Yorick and his allies can. This wall can only be destroyed by turrets and auto attacks, making it extremely deadly against champions with low attack speeds. Yorick basically uses his ability to prevent his enemies from running away, forcing them to fight Yorick and his ghouls, or make the lose-lose decision of whether to attack Yorick or spend valuable time trying to destroy the wall. Yorick's W is one of those things that really separates a good Yorick from a bad one. In the right hands, it is amazing at securing kills or forcing enemies to flash. What Yorick is really known for, though, is his ultimate, Eulogy of the Isles. Yorick's ultimate summons the Maiden of the Mist, who can summon up to 4 Mistwalkers around her. Yorick's Maiden has a significant health pool, deals a surprising amount of magic damage to the targets, and causes Yorick's attacks to do up to 10% of the target's maximum health every 2 seconds. That last part is extremely important. Yorick's Maiden gives Yorick incredible dueling power and gives him a massive damage spike. However, the Maiden's AI is extremely buggy, and the extent to which Yorick can control the Maiden is very limited. Learning the quirks of Maiden AI is extremely important to learning Yorick. It's also extremely important to let your ghouls and your Maidens do the work for you in duels or 1v2 scenarios. Players tend to ignore the ghouls in the Maiden even though they deal a massive amount of damage. Always remember to kite backwards with your W and your E and let your ghouls wail on your opponent until your Q is back off cooldown. Yorick benefits greatly from dragged out fights. Always play around your cooldowns. Don't just stand in front of your lane opponent and rock'em sock'em robots him to death. All in all, Yorick is one of those champions that wears you down and grinds you into the dirt. But don't worry, Yorick is always looking for a new friend to summon to the battlefield once you're 6 feet under. That's all the champions that we're going to be covering in this video. Let me know in the comments what you love or hate about these Juggernauts and which champions or subclasses you want me to cover next. If you enjoyed this video, especially with the new in-game footage, please hit that like button. This video took a lot of work on my part, and I also had a lot of help from Juggernaut mains. As you can see on the screen, I had 12 Juggernaut mains help me with this video. A few of these people have YouTube channels or Twitch streams, and I've linked all of them in the video description below. Please check them out and show your support of me by supporting them as well. Also, if you're interested in any of these Juggernauts, please check out the subreddits for each of these champions. There's a ton of helpful people there who can answer all of your questions far better than I can. If you're interested in helping out in future videos, if you're curious what videos I'm planning on doing next, please check out our Discord. There are a ton of helpful people there, and it's a great place to ask me questions, provide suggestions for the channel, discuss esports, or even find a couple people to play a game with. Link to our Discord is in the video description below. And if you've made it this far in the video and you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my videos. I hope you all have a fantastic day. This is Randomonium, signing off.